Right. So there I was, Alexander Moreno, 28 years old, clutching Grandpa's ridiculously expensive fountain pen, like it was some sort of emotional support object, sitting through what can only be described as the most spectacularly performative funeral Portland, Maine has ever witnessed. And trust me, in a town where people hold grudges about parking spaces from 1987, that's saying something. My family's grief was, well, let's call it what was, an audition for Britain's Got Talent. If Britain's Got Talent specialized in Oscar-worthy displays of fake crying and Instagram-worthy poses beside coffins, Mum was there, naturally, with her iPhone at the ready, mascara running in what I can only assume were strategically calculated rivulets. Bad angle, she hissed at my aunt, adjusting her position beside the casket like she was doing a photo shoot for Vogue's Morning Chic edition. Because nothing says, I'm devastated by loss, quite like worrying about your bloody lighting. Dad, meanwhile, was in the back row, eyes glued to his phone, frantically checking his stocks. Because apparently, even death takes a back seat to the FTSE 100. His face had that particular shade of constipated concern that only comes from watching your portfolio tank, whilst pretending to mourn. Brilliant multitasking. That, before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Because nothing says family bonding quite like crowdsourcing your global audience whilst your relatives plot your demise over inheritance money. Lovely. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, the funeral. Or, as I like to call it, the day everything went spectacularly tits up. Hours after we laid Grandpa to rest. And by laid to rest, I mean stood around pretending to care, whilst secretly wondering who'd get the good china. The family attorney dropped what can only be described as a tactical nuclear weapon into the middle of our dysfunctional little gathering. I was inheriting 18 million pounds. Roughly $22.5 million for you Americans keeping score at home. The silence that followed was exquisite, like that moment in a horror film right before the monster jumps out, except the monster was my family's thinly veiled greed, and was already out doing a little dance in the solicitor's office. Mum's smile didn't just vanish. It evaporated. 1 second it was there, all practice sympathy and Instagram filter perfection. The next it had been replaced by a look that could curdle milk at 50 paces. Dad actually said no way out loud, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly the paragon of eloquence you'd expect from a man who claims to be a successful businessman. My brother Jeremy, we'll get to him later, the absolute weapon, just glared at me like I'd personally murdered Grandpa and then danced on his grave wearing tap shoes. You schemed for this, he spat, because apparently in Jeremy's world, be your grandfather's favorite because you actually visited him instead of just texting happy birthday 3 days late counts as scheming. Then the solicitor played a video. Because of course there was a video. Grandpa and Grandma, recorded months before they passed, their voices firm and frankly quite done with everyone's nonsense. Some of you, Grandpa said, looking directly into the camera with the kind of disappointed dad energy that could power a small village, only saw our money. You saw pound signs where there should have been love. You saw investments where there should have been family. My chest tightened, not because I was emotional. Well, not just because I was emotional, but because I could feel the rage radiating off my family like heat off tarmac in summer. It was delicious and terrifying in equal measure. That night, we had family dinner. Because nothing says, let's process our grief, quite like forcing everyone into the same room, whilst they're actively fantasizing about murdering each other with the salad tongs. It went exactly as well as you'd imagine. Mum started off pleasant enough, which should have been my first warning. She has this particular smile she uses when she wants something. All teeth, no warmth, like a shark that's taken a hospitality course. Alexander, darling, she cooed, and I swear I could hear the poison honey dripping from every syllable. We need to discuss the inheritance, as a family. There's nothing to discuss, I said, cutting into my chicken with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. Grandpa left it to me. End of. Don't be ridiculous, Dad interjected, because God forbid I have a conversation with just one parent at a time. You're 28. You don't know the first thing about managing that kind of money. Sign it over to us. We'll handle it properly. Properly. Right. Because their track record with money was just sterling. Dad's last 3 business ventures had gone under faster than the Titanic, and Mum's idea of financial planning involved buying things she couldn't afford and then crying about it on social media. "No," I said simply. The temperature in the room dropped about 15 degrees. "I'm sorry." Mum's voice had gone from honey to cut glass. "What did you just say?" I said no. It's a complete sentence, surprisingly versatile. Jeremy laughed, but not the fun kind of laugh. The kind of laugh that serial killers probably practice in the mirror. "Oh, this is brilliant. St. Alexander. Too good for his own family." "I'm not too good for anyone," I replied, feeling my temper starting to fray like cheap rope. "I'm just not signing over 18 million quid because you lot have suddenly remembered I exist." That's when Mum stood up. I should have seen it coming. Really, I should have. But I was too busy being righteously indignant to notice her hand coming toward my face until it had already made contact. The slap echoed around the dining room, like a gunshot. "You don't deserve it," she hissed, standing over me like some sort of avenging angel. If avenging angels wore Chanel and had recent Botox. "You have no say here. You're nothing." The table had gone completely silent. Even Jeremy looked uncomfortable, which was saying something. I didn't flinch, didn't touch my face, even though my cheek was stinging like I'd been attacked by particularly aggressive wasps. I just looked at her, this woman who'd given birth to me and then spent the next 28 years viewing me as either an inconvenience or an investment, and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. "I'm leaving," I said calmly, standing up. "Sit down," Dad commanded, like I was still 12 and he had any authority left over me. "No." I walked out, got into my car, pulled out my phone with trembling fingers, and did something I'd been paying for out of my own pocket for months without them knowing. I canceled everything. Their broadband, their mobile contracts, their premium cable package, the electricity bill for their massive house in the posh part of town that they couldn't actually afford, the water, the lot. I typed out the messages to each provider. "Cancel everything immediately. I am no longer authorizing these payments." They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought wrong. I was just getting started. Morning arrived with all the subtle grace of a sledgehammer to the temporal lobe. My phone started buzzing at 6 a.m., which is just an obscene time to be conscious, let alone dealing with family drama. Dad's voicemail came through first. His voice had that particular quality of barely restrained violence that only middle-aged men who've just discovered their Wi-Fi doesn't work can achieve. "What the hell did you do, Alexander? Fix this or you're done. You hear me? Done." I played it twice, partly to make sure I'd heard correctly, partly because his impotent rage was oddly satisfying. In the background, I could hear Mum shrieking about the power being out and Jeremy complaining that he couldn't check his Instagram. Apparently, their entire house had gone dark when the services I'd been quietly paying for, because I'm an idiot with boundary issues, had been switched off. Schadenfreude is a beautiful thing, truly, but I couldn't stay in my flat. Dad controlled the lease. Because of course he did. Maintaining control over adult children is basically his hobby, and I knew eviction papers would be coming faster than you could say dysfunctional family dynamics. I packed a bag, laptop, clothes, Grandpa's fountain pen, and his old cashmere scarf that still smelled faintly of his cologne and pipe tobacco. The scent hit me like a lorry, and for a moment, I just stood there in my bedroom, holding the scarf and thinking about Sunday lunches and fishing trips and all the times Grandpa had actually treated me like a person rather than a disappointment or a cash machine. Then I locked up, avoided my nosy neighbors. Jean from Tubi could smell drama from 3 floors away, and headed for the coast before rush hour turned the motorway into a car park. The drive to Grandpa's harbor house felt endless. The sort of journey where your brain helpfully replays every awful moment from the previous evening on loop, like a sadistic highlight reel. The bay's outline emerged as dawn broke, all gray water and seagulls, and that particular smell of salt and fish that meant I was nearly home. And it was home, more than my flat had ever been, more than my parents' pristine show house with its white carpets and emotional coldness certainly was. I parked by the old wooden steps, and before I'd even reached the door, it swung open. A middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind of quiet, capable demeanor that made you trust him immediately stepped out. "Mr. Alexander," he said, extending a hand that had seen actual manual labor, unlike my father's manicure businessman paws. "Welcome. I'm Luis Alvarez. I've been estate manager here for 15 years. Pleasure." I managed, shaking his hand. He guided me inside. The floors creaked in that familiar way that made my shoulders drop about 3 inches. For the first time in 24 hours, I could breathe properly. "Your grandparents," Louise said quietly, leading me through Grandpa's study. "They trusted me with something. Said you'd need it if the family turned ugly." Understatement of the century, I muttered. He pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. They were very specific. "Only give this to Alexander. Only if things went badly." The study looked exactly as I remembered. Grandpa's massive oak desk, cluttered with old ledgers from the seafood business he'd built from nothing, photographs of trawlers and market stalls. A lifetime of hard work, condensed into one room. I plugged in the USB. Files popped up immediately. What I found made my earlier satisfaction at cutting off the utilities seem quaint. The first document was an email chain from 3 years ago. Dad, in writing, begging Grandpa for £80,000. "Quick returns," he'd promised. "Can't miss investment opportunity. Trust me, Dad." Grandpa, bless him, had been cautious, but he'd sent the money anyway, because he was a soft touch when it came to family, which is probably why he ended up with such a spectacular collection of leeches. The follow-up emails made for fascinating reading. Dad dodging questions about repayment. Dad asking for more money. Dad promising it was just a temporary cash flow issue. There was no repayment, obviously, because Dad's business acumen made a concussed hamster look like Warren Buffett. Another folder held scanned journal entries. Grandma's handwriting, neat and slightly accusatory. "Catherine arrived today with estate agents." One entry read, "Catherine, being my mother, naturally said she wanted redecorating ideas. But I overheard her discussing market value. Our home. She was pricing our home whilst we were still living in it." Christ. I scrolled faster, my fingers starting to shake. Not from fear, from fury. Thousands of pounds wired to Jeremy's failed app ventures, each one more ridiculous than the last. Swipe right for sushi, an app that was literally just Uber Eats but worse. Instamate, don't even get me started. Every single one had defaulted, taking Grandpa's money with it. Property deeds. Mom had tried to get Grandpa to sign papers last year, claiming they were just updates for tax purposes. They weren't. They would have transferred partial ownership of this house, where I was currently standing, to her. They'd been chipping away at the estate piece by piece, like particularly dedicated termites, whilst playing the role of loving family members. I felt sick. A soft knock at the door interrupted my spiral into rage. Denise Ellis, the housekeeper who'd been with my grandparents for over a decade, entered carrying tea. Her eyes were red from crying. Actual crying, not the Instagram variety. "Reading Mrs. Crystal's records?" she asked, setting the tray down. It wasn't really a question. "How did you?" She asked me to keep copies too. Denise returned a moment later with a box. Printouts, loan agreements, startup proposals Jeremy had sent, investment opportunities Dad had pitched. None of it repaid. All of it documented. "Your mother," Denise said quietly. She even tried getting signatures during hospital visits. "When your grandfather was on morphine, barely conscious, she'd bring papers, tell him they were insurance forms." The rage I'd been feeling crystallized into something colder, sharper. This wasn't just greed. This was calculated. My phone dinged. A text from Brandon King, my colleague at the school where I taught year 6. "On my way. Heard about the mess. Bringing wine." Brandon was the sort of friend who didn't need details to show up. 5 minutes later, he arrived, hugged me without saying anything, which was perfect, because I didn't have words, and we sat together, going through files. "This is absolutely barking mad," Brandon said, pointing to a wire transfer. "They've been bleeding your grandparents dry for years." His tech skills. Brandon taught computer science and had the annoying habit of being good at everything. Helped organize the digital chaos, flagging patterns I'd missed. By afternoon, the house felt less like a refuge and more like a fortress. Luis checked the security system, offering to lock the gates. "Your grandparents prepared for this," he said, and I believed him. "We need a plan," Brandon said, ever practical. I nodded. The fight was just beginning, and if my family thought I was going to roll over and play dead, they were about to discover just how much of Grandpa's stubbornness I'd inherited. The next afternoon found me at Grandpa's desk again, the USB drive practically burning a hole in my conscience. I needed proper help, the kind of help that came with law degrees and professional liability insurance. I rang Ryan Hayes, the family solicitor who'd read the will. "Mr. Moreno," he said, voice steady in that way that lawyer's perfect. "I'm on my way." Within hours, the dining room had transformed into what can only be described as war room meets dinner party. It would have been quite cozy if we weren't plotting legal warfare against my own relatives. Ryan arrived first, his leather briefcase bulging with enough folders to fill a small library. "Your grandparents trusted me for 20 years, he said, setting up at the table with the efficiency of someone who'd done this dance before. I'm not about to let their legacy be picked apart by vultures. I quite like Ryan. Victoria Grant, the financial advisor, followed next. She had the look of someone who could calculate compound interest in her head while simultaneously judging your life choices. Her tablet glowed with account details. "I've locked everything down," she assured me. "The estate funds are tighter than a duck's arse. And that's watertight." Anna Reed, Grandpa's business partner in the seafood empire, strode in next. She had that particular energy of someone who'd spent 40 years in fish markets and wasn't impressed by anyone's nonsense. "Someone's been sniffing around our suppliers," she said grimly, "asking about contracts. Try to get information about the business structure." Denise slipped in quietly, clutching her own folder of evidence. Brandon sat beside me, already scrolling through his phone like a man possessed. "Oh, you're going to love this," he said, tilting his screen toward me. Mum's Instagram, a tearful selfie, professionally lit, captioned, "Betrayed by family, fighting for what's rightfully ours. Hashtag family first, hashtag justice for Crystal." The post already had hundreds of likes. Comments from strangers piling up, all of them taking her side, because she positioned herself as the victim. Local Portland residents I'd known my whole life were writing things like, "So sorry for your loss," and "Families should stick together." "She's painted you as a villain," Brandon muttered, his fingers flying as he screenshot the post for evidence. I rubbed my temples. The sting of Mum's slap still felt fresh, even though it had been days. "They're not stopping." "No," Ryan agreed, pulling out papers that looked thoroughly intimidating. "But we can. Protective orders for starters. We need more evidence, though." Denise set down her folder with a decisive thump. "I've got something." Bank statements. Each one highlighted transfers to Dad's failed ventures. Real estate deals that went nowhere. Investment schemes that collapsed. All funded by my grandparents' money. None of it repaid. Mrs. Crystal asked me to track every pound. Denise said quietly. She knew what they were doing. Anna spoke up. "The employees at the seafood stores have reported odd phone calls. Someone claiming to represent the family, digging for financial information, trying to access accounts." My stomach twisted. Jeremy had to be. His tech startup, another spectacular failure, had always burned through cash like it was going out of fashion, and now it seemed he was targeting the family business to fund his next disaster. Victoria tapped her tablet with one perfectly manicured nail. "I found attempted withdrawals from last week. Blocked, thankfully, because your grandparents had changed all the access codes about 6 months ago." "They knew," I said softly. "They knew this would happen." Luis appeared in the doorway, holding a small external hard drive. "Mr. Alexander, the security system has been recording everything." We crowded around Grandpa's ancient computer as Luis plugged it in. The footage loaded, grainy but clear enough. The day of the funeral. Mum, wrapping silverware in her scarf whilst pretending to dab her eyes. Dad, pocketing a signed ledger from the study. Jeremy, slipping a small painting, one I knew Grandpa had loved, under his jacket. They'd moved through the house like thieves at a car boot sale, their fake tears barely dry on their designer tissues. "That's theft," Ryan said, his pen scratching furiously across his legal pad. "Combined with the financial records, this gives us grounds for serious legal action." Brandon zoomed in on one particular frame. "Look, your mom's checking prices on her phone, while she's grabbing stuff. She's literally Googling antique silverware value at her father-in-law's funeral." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I mean, I'd known they were greedy. I'd known they didn't actually care. But seeing it there, documented in grainy CCTV footage, made it somehow more real and more horrible. My phone buzzed. Another voicemail from Jeremy. "You're making a mistake, Alexander." His voice came through, trying for threatening but landing somewhere around petulant teenager. "Hand over or we'll make things public. We'll tell everyone what you're really like." I played it on speaker for the group. "He's bluffing," Brandon said immediately, "but they're coordinating. That Instagram post wasn't random. This is orchestrated." Victoria leaned forward, all business. "Your grandparents set up a trust structure specifically to protect the estate from this kind of, let's call it what it is, theft. I've got the complete portfolio. The £18 million is mostly in business assets and investments. It's not just sitting in a bank account they can access. The employees are loyal," Anna added. "They remember your grandfather. They'll back you if this hits the community." Denise spoke softly, but her words carried weight. "Mrs. Crystal warned me especially about your mother. Told me to watch her." She pulled out another document, a letter from Mum to Grandma, dated last year, pushing for a quick sale to Harbor House. "For your benefit," the letter claimed, with all the sincerity of a used car salesman. The attached property appraisal showed millions in potential profit. I stood, needing to move, to process. "What's our next step?" Ryan flipped open his laptop with practiced efficiency. "We compile everything. The CCTV footage, the financial records, that letter, the voicemails. We file for emergency protective orders. Maine courts move quickly when there's clear evidence of harassment and theft." Brandon's phone pinged. His face darkened. Another post. "She's doubled down. Now she's hinting at your unstable behavior to her followers." I looked at the screen. Comments from local business owners I'd known for years, questioning my character, my sanity, my right to the inheritance. "We need to counter this," Brandon urged, already drafting a response from my account. "Not yet," Ryan said firmly. "Let them keep talking. Every post, every voicemail, every threat. It's evidence. They're building our case for us." Louis checked his phone. "The gates are secure. I'll monitor for any visitors." Anna nodded. "I'll warn the store managers. If anyone makes suspicious calls, we document everything." The room hummed with purpose. These people, not my blood relatives, but these people who'd chosen to stand beside me. They were my real family. As evening fell, I looked around the table. Grandpa's words echoed in my head. "Stand firm, Alexander. Family is who lifts you up, not who tears you down." They thought they could bully me into submission. They'd underestimated how thoroughly Grandpa had prepared me for this fight. Every lie they told, every threat they made, was just more ammunition. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. 3 days after our war room meeting, my phone had become less communication device and more instrument of psychological torture. It wouldn't stop buzzing, vibrating, pinging, like a particularly insistent wasp trapped in my pocket. I sat in Grandpa's study. My study now, I suppose, though saying out loud still felt presumptuous. Staring at Brandon's laptop. The Harbor House was quiet except for the rhythmic crash of waves outside, which would have been peaceful if I wasn't currently watching my family destroy my reputation in real time. "Your mum's gone viral," Brandon said, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury. I glanced at the screen. Mum's latest Instagram post was a masterclass in manipulation. She'd filmed herself in a black dress, not the one from the funeral. I noticed. This was a new one, probably bought specifically for this performance, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while speaking directly to camera. "My own son has turned against us," she said, voice quivering with Oscar-worthy precision. "He's stolen what belongs to the family. Turned his back on his own mother. I don't know where we went wrong." The comments section was a cesspit of support. Thousands of followers, all of them complete strangers who knew nothing about our family, offering sympathy and agreeing that I was indeed a terrible person, ungrateful, narcissist, elder abuse. Cut him off completely. My throat tightened, but I pushed the feeling down. Getting emotional wouldn't help anyone, least of all me. Brandon scrolled further. "She's tagging businesses in Portland. She's trying to turn the entire bloody town against you." I checked my work email. My principal had forwarded something from Dad. The subject line alone was enough to make me want to throw my laptop out the window. Concerns regarding Alexander Moreno's mental state. The email claimed I wasn't fit to teach, that I was having some sort of breakdown, that the school should be aware of my erratic behavior and concerning decision-making. The school hadn't bought it, thankfully. My principal had added a note. "Ignore this. We know you. This is clearly family drama. Take the time you need." Still, the accusation stung like iodine on an open wound. "They're hitting you from every angle," Brandon said, fingers flying across his keyboard with the intensity of someone hacking into MI6. My phone pinged again. A direct message on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. Just a video link, no context. I clicked it. My stomach dropped so fast, I thought I might actually be sick. It was Grandpa and Grandma. Or rather, it looked like them, sounded like them, but something was wrong. Their movements were slightly off, like watching someone act through syrup. Their voices had the stilted, robotic quality. "Alexander pressured us to change the will," fake Grandma said, her face frozen in an expression that didn't quite match the words. "We were scared. We didn't know what to do. He threatened to cut us off," fake Grandpa added, "to abandon us in our old age. We had no choice." The video was a deep fake, a remarkably convincing one, mind you, but a deep fake nonetheless. Their faces superimposed on actors, their voices synthesized from old recordings. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked entirely real. "This is next-level psychotic," Brandon muttered, already pausing and rewinding the clip. "Jeremy. Has to be. He's a tech wanker." I rang Ryan immediately. "They've made a deep fake video. It's slander. It's evidence," Ryan said calmly. Forwarded to me. "This is actually good for us, Alexander. They've escalated from petty theft to fraud. That's a serious crime." Brandon was already analyzing the file on his laptop, pulling it apart like a particularly determined pathologist. "Metadata shows it was created 2 days ago," he said, pointing at strings of code that meant nothing to me but apparently everything to him. "And I can trace the upload to an IP address. Want to bet it links back to Jeremy's startup server?" His tech knowledge was proving more valuable than I'd ever imagined. "Can you prove it's fake?" "Already on it." He pulled up some sort of analysis software. The deep fake used a free AI tool. Sloppy work, really. I can isolate the artifacts. Pixel distortions, audio glitches, places where the face mapping doesn't quite match. We can prove it's fabricated. He emailed the complete analysis to Ryan, who added it to what I imagined was becoming an absolutely enormous legal file. "This strengthens our case considerably," Ryan said when he arrived an hour later, his briefcase somehow even more stuffed than before. "They're not just trying to take your inheritance anymore. They're actively trying to destroy your reputation. That's harassment, defamation, and fraud. Maine courts don't take kindly to this sort of behavior." By the next morning, Mom had posted again. This time it was an old photo of me as a teenager, spotty, awkward, holding a fish I caught on one of those trips with Grandpa, with the caption, "He's always been troubled. We tried our best, but some children just turn out wrong. Hashtag heartbroken mother, hashtag praying for him." I'd grown up with half these people liking the post. Mrs. Henderson from the corner shop, Tom Bradley, who'd taught me football, Sarah Chun, who'd been my teaching mentor. All of them taking Mum's side because she got there first with her version of events. I felt exposed, flayed, like she'd peel back my skin and put my insecurities on display for the world to judge. They're desperate, Brandon said firmly, squeezing my hand. This is what desperate looks like. Let's stay focused. I took a breath. Grandpa's voice in my head. Keep your head clear, lad. Panic helps no one. Victoria rang with an update. Your parents tried accessing the state accounts again this morning. Denied, obviously, thanks to the new security measures. But they're definitely trying. Anna texted next. Store managers are getting anonymous emails questioning the business's stability, asking about layoffs, financial trouble. It's your family, no question. Their attacks were relentless, coordinated. But every move gave us more documentation, more evidence, more rope for them to hang themselves with. Ryan filed protective orders that afternoon. Maine's laws are quite strict about harassment, he explained. With the deepfake video, the Instagram posts, the emails to your workplace. We're looking at a strong case. The court should approve temporary orders quickly. By the end of the week, it came through. Temporary protective orders granted. Mom, Dad, and Jeremy were legally barred from contacting me or the business directly. Violations could mean fines or even jail time. Brandon showed me a draft post on my own Instagram account, which I've been ignoring for days. Simple, direct, lies spread quickly, but the truth tends to stick around longer. Not yet, Ryan advised. Let the orders at first. The impact will be bigger. They won't expect it. I stood at the window, watching gray waves roll against the harbor wall. Steady, relentless, exactly how I needed to be. My family thought they could bury me under an avalanche of lies and social media manipulation. What they didn't realize was that every shovelful of dirt they threw was just making the hole they dug for themselves that much deeper. Poetic, really. A week after protective orders were filed, I found myself standing outside the Portland Chamber of Commerce, the harbor wind cutting through my jacket like a particularly vindictive knife. The building looked exactly as I remembered it, all-weather brick and tasteful signage, but my stomach was doing acrobatics that would have impressed the Cirque du Soleil. This luncheon was meant to honor Grandpa and Grandma's contributions to Portland's fishing industry. A lovely gesture. The problem was, I knew my family would show up. They were many things, liars, thieves, social media manipulators, but they'd never miss an opportunity for public attention. Ryan adjusted his tie beside me, looking remarkably calm for someone about to witness potential bloodshed. Stay calm, he said, which is what people say when they know things are about to become spectacularly uncalm. The community is watching. Inside, the banquet hall buzzed with local business owners. The kind of people who'd known Grandpa for decades, who'd bought fish from him, who remembered when he was just starting out with one van and a dream. Their chatter paused slightly as I entered, heads turning, whispers starting. I could practically hear them. That's the grandson, the one with the inheritance drama. Heard his mother's posting about it online. Anna was already at our table, leaning in as I sat. Employees are here to back you up, she whispered, nodding toward a group wearing company polo shirts. People who'd actually worked with Grandpa, not just taking his money. Brandon, phone perpetually in hand, scanned the room like a meerkat on guard duty. No sign of them yet. The chamber president, a gray-haired man named Tom Wheeler, who'd probably been president since the Bronze Age, took the podium. We're here to celebrate the Moreno family's contribution to Portland, he began, holding up a plaque that caught the light. Their seafood business built jobs, strengthened our community, and exemplified the values we hold dear. Applause rippled through the room. Then I saw a movement at the entrance. Mum swept in like she was arriving at the bloody Met Gala. Black dress, designer handbag, phone already recording. Dad and Jeremy trailed behind her like slightly rubbish henchmen. Their faces radiated confidence. Ownership, like they belonged here, like this event was for them. Mum made directly for Tom, her voice pitched to carry across the entire hall. There's been a terrible misunderstanding about the estate, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she probably brought specifically for this moment. We're here to claim the family heirlooms that rightfully belong to all of us. Dad stepped forward, his voice smooth as butter and twice as greasy. The business belongs to the whole family. Not just one person who happened to be favored. Jeremy hung back, looking distinctly uncomfortable. At least he had the decency to appear uneasy about this public ambush. I stood, my legs surprisingly steady despite my heart trying to escape to my ribcage. "Those heirlooms were left to me," I said, loud enough to be heard in the cheap seats. "The will is clear. Grandpa made his choice." Gasps spread through the crowd like ripples on water. Mum's smile faltered, but she rallied quickly. "Alexander isn't equipped to manage this. He's confused, unstable. We're only trying to help." Before I could respond, and I had several responses queued up, none of them polite, a woman in the crowd stood up, Mrs. Larson, Grandpa's neighbor for over 20 years. "I saw you take silverware from their house the day of the funeral," she called out, her phone raised, displaying a photo. "Posted it online, too. You were loading boxes into your car, whilst the rest of us were still mourning." The murmurs grew louder. Heads turned toward my family. A store manager in one of our company polos stood next. "We've been getting anonymous emails trying to scare our suppliers, claiming the business was in trouble, that there'd be layoffs. But we know what the Morenos actually wanted, and it wasn't this." Brandon leaned over, whispering urgently, "Check Twitter." I glanced at his phone. Local reporters were live-tweeting the confrontation. Screenshots of Mrs. Larson's photo. Quotes from the store manager. A news van was idling outside, its logo visible through the windows. "Who called the bloody media?" Dad snapped, his face going an interesting shade of puce. Another neighbor, Mr. Coleman, raised his hand with the kind of casual defiance that made me want to buy him a pint. "I did. We protect our own in Portland. And Morenos were ours." Mum clutched her handbag, like it might offer some protection from the court of public opinion. "This is a family matter," she said, voice climbing several octaves into the range only dogs and incredibly stressed mothers can hear. But the room wasn't hers anymore. It was never hers. It belonged to people who'd actually known Grandpa, who'd respected him, who hadn't seen him as a walking ATM. Anna stood, her voice cutting through the chaos like a particularly sharp gutting knife. "The seafood business thrives because of Eric and Crystal's integrity, not because of opportunists who showed up after they died." The employees clapped. Some stood. The show of support was overwhelming and slightly terrifying in its intensity. A reporter approached, microphone at the ready, asking about the will, the inheritance, the accusations flying around social media. Ryan handed me a folder with the kind of meaningful look that suggested this was a moment. I held up the will, an official copy, complete with legal stamps and everything, and my voice came out clearer than I'd expected. Grandpa and Grandma chose me to carry on their legacy. They made that choice deliberately, knowing exactly what they were doing. And every move this lot has made, I gestured at my family, proves exactly why they made that choice. The applause was thunderous. Actual standing ovation territory. I felt simultaneously vindicated and like I might cry, which would have rather ruined the moment. Jeremy's eyes met mine for a split second. There might have been guilt there. Might have been. But he stayed silent, which in some ways was worse than if he joined in. Dad grabbed Mum's arm, steering her toward the exit like a ship's captain abandoning a sinking vessel. "This isn't over," he muttered. But his steps were hurried, his confidence evaporating like morning mist. Jeremy followed, head down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The news van's camera tracked them as they left, capturing their retreat for posterity and the 6 o'clock news. Their united front, so carefully constructed on Instagram, crumbled under the weight of actual community judgment. Tom returned to the podium, holding up the plaque with renewed purpose. "To Alexander Moreno," he said clearly, "for upholding the Moreno legacy with dignity and honor." The room stood again, clapping. These people, strangers and acquaintances, and people who'd known Grandpa, supported me in a way my actual family never had. Brandon grinned, snapping photos. This is going viral for all the right reasons now. Anna squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandparents would be ridiculously proud." I held the plaque, feeling its weight. Not heavy exactly, but significant. They'd try to destroy me in front of everyone, Try to paint me as a villain in front of people who'd known me since I was in nappies. It hadn't worked. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, I felt something other than anger or grief or determination. I felt hope. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Portland had chosen its side, and it wasn't theirs. 3 months after the mediation, which had been about as pleasant as dental surgery performed with a rusty spoon, I sat at my desk at Portland Primary School. My nameplate read, Alexander Moreno, Year 6 teacher. And somehow, despite everything, that title still grounded me more than 18 million pound inheritor ever could. The Harbor House had become properly mine now, not just legally, but emotionally. I'd stopped feeling like an intruder in Grandpa's space and started feeling like I was continuing what he'd built. The floors still creaked in the same places. The study still smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. But now there were my books on the shelves, my coffee cups in the sink, my mess, my life, my home. I'd spent the last few weeks setting up the Moreno Foundation, a scholarship fund for young people training in the fishing and seafood trade. Because Grandpa had always believed in investing in people, not just businesses, and I figured that was as good a legacy as any. Today, the first recipients were visiting. 5 teenagers filed into my classroom, clutching acceptance letters like golden tickets to Willy Wonka's factory. Their eyes were wide, nervous, excited in that particular way that teenagers get when something impossibly good is happening, and they're waiting for someone to tell them it's a joke. Right, I said, handing out information packets. The program covers full tuition for vocational courses, living stipend so you're not eating beans on toast for 3 years, and guaranteed apprenticeships at the family seafood business once you're qualified. One girl, nervous but clearly brilliant, the type who'd been told she wasn't academic enough for university, whispered, "This changes everything." I smiled, thinking about Grandpa's lessons on hard work, about how he'd started with nothing and built an empire through sheer bloody-minded determination and treating people with respect. That's rather the point. Outside school, life had settled into something approaching normal. If you could call having millions of pounds and a family who wanted you dead normal, I blocked Mum's number after her last text, which had been a masterpiece of manipulation. "Darling, can't we put this behind us? Family is everything. Hashtag family first." Followed by a link to her latest Instagram sob story. Delete, block, move on. Dad's emails demanding a cut of the inheritance. His exact words were, fair distribution of family assets, which was rich coming from someone who'd burned through hundreds of thousands of Grandpa's money. Went straight to spam. Jeremy sent one message asking to meet. Just us. No lawyers. I won't explain. I'd stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The mediation agreement they'd signed bound them to return everything they'd stolen. The silverware, the ledgers, that painting Jeremy had nicked. All of it was back in the house now, returned with varying degrees of grace. Mum had thrown the silverware at Ryan's feet. During the mediation, Dad had forgotten several items and needed 3 separate reminders. Jeremy had at least had the decency to return things without commentary. Contact was over. Done. Finished. Ryan rang regularly with updates, which ranged from satisfying to absolutely delicious. "Your parents violated protective orders," he said one Thursday, sounding almost cheerful about it. "They emailed one of your suppliers claiming you were mismanaging the business and trying to get them to breach contract." The court had not been amused. Fines hit Dad's already crumbling real estate empire, shoving him toward Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His credit score, once something he bragged about at dinner parties, because he was that sort of insufferable, was now lower than a limbo stick at a children's party. Portland's business community, tight-knit and loyal to those who earned it, had cut him off completely. No one would touch him. No one would return his calls. He'd become persona non grata in the town where he'd once been someone. Karma, I decided, was real and she had excellent timing. Brandon stopped by the house one evening, carrying takeout from the local chippy, because he was a phenomenal human being. "Your mum's influencer career is properly dead," he said, scrolling through his phone while stealing my chips. Mum's follower count had tanked after the Portland Press-Herald ran a detailed story about the mediation, about the theft, about the Instagram manipulation. Her carefully curated image as a grieving family matriarch had evaporated faster than water on a hot pan. The civil lawsuit for slander that Ryan had filed, because apparently when you make deepfake videos and post lies on Instagram, people can sue you for that, who knew, was still pending. But her brand deals had vanished. Her sponsored posts had stopped. Her comment section was now full of people calling her out rather than offering sympathy. She'd built her image on lies, and when the truth came out, the whole thing had collapsed like a souffle in an earthquake. Jeremy's startup had imploded next, which honestly surprised no one except possibly Jeremy. His investors, spooked by the family drama and negative press, had pulled their funding faster than rats, leaving a sinking ship. Ryan had mentioned that elder abuse charges were still on the table if we wanted to pursue them. Under Maine law, what they'd done, the manipulation, the theft during hospital visits, the exploitation of elderly relatives, could result in criminal charges, probation at minimum, possibly jail time. Jeremy's last email had hinted at regret. I know I messed up. I know I can't fix this. But I'm sorry. I'd read it, felt nothing, deleted it. Some apologies come too late. Some actions can't be forgiven just because someone finally feels bad about them. The seafood business, meanwhile, was thriving. Anna had implemented an employee profit-sharing scheme I proposed, because Grandpa had always believed workers should benefit from success, and morale had never been higher. The people who'd actually built the business, who'd shown up day after day for decades, were finally getting their fair share. Victoria Grant sent financial reports monthly. The estate's investments were stable, growing steadily. The business was expanding. Everything Grandpa and Grandma had built was not just surviving, but flourishing. They'd be proud, Victoria wrote in her last email, and I'd had to step away from the computer for a moment because that hit harder than expected. One afternoon, Louise brought a box down from the attic, labeled for Alexander in Grandma's neat handwriting. Inside were Grandpa's old business journals from the 1960s, when he'd first started. Handwritten entries about buying the first van, making the first sales, building relationships with fishermen and suppliers. The foundation of everything that came after. Tucked between the pages was a note from Grandma, written in her last months. Stand firm, Alexander. Real family is who lifts you up, not who takes from you. You'll know the difference. I held the note, my eyes stinging but refusing to actually cry, because I was at work, and Year 6 students are absolutely merciless if they sense emotional vulnerability. At school, a student sat in my office during lunch break, her voice shaky. My parents say I owe them for everything. Every meal, every piece of clothing, every ride to school. They keep a list. They say I'll need to pay them back. I handed her a packet I'd put together. Resources for young people setting boundaries, information about financial abuse, contact numbers for support services, things I wished I'd had at her age. You're worth more than their demands, I told her, meaning every word. You don't owe anyone for basic care. That's what parents are supposed to do. She left looking slightly less burdened, and I'd felt like maybe, possibly, something good had come from this absolute disaster. 6 months after mediation, the Portland Press-Herald ran a feature article about the Moreno Foundation. Local teacher honors family legacy, the headline read, which was infinitely better than family inheritance drama turns ugly. The article covered the scholarships, the profit sharing, the community impact. Not a single word about the dysfunction, the theft, the court cases. Ryan had managed to keep it all quiet, exactly as I'd requested. I didn't need the whole world knowing my family's dirty laundry. The people who mattered already knew. I walked the harbor house ground that evening, stopping at a new bench I'd installed overlooking the water. A plaque read, Crystal and Eric Moreno, legacy built on love. The team, Ryan, Brandon, Anna, Victoria, Luis, Denise, gathered for dinner that night. The dining table, once a place of conflict and lies, now held actual warmth, laughter, friendship earned through loyalty rather than demanded through blood. These were my family now. The people who'd stood by me when they didn't have to, who'd fought for me, who'd chosen me. Mom, Dad, and Jeremy kept trying. Texts from new numbers. Emails from anonymous accounts. A letter from Mom's solicitor suggesting we put this unpleasantness behind us, which was a truly spectacular euphemism for, please give us money. I ignored them all. My phone's block list was longer than most people's contact lists, and I'd made peace with that. Their world had collapsed under the weight of their own greed and lies. Dad's business was done. Mom's influencer career was finished. Jeremy's start was dead, and I'd built something real from the ashes of their manipulation. The lesson was clear, even if it had been painful as hell to learn. Family isn't automatic. It's not owed to you because you share DNA. Real family, the kind worth having, is built on trust, respect, and actually giving a damn about each other. Everything else is just people who happen to share your surname. 7 students arrive that Monday morning, clutching acceptance letters like they might disappear if they weren't held tightly enough. The Moreno Foundation's second cohort, nervous but eager, full of that particular hope that comes from having someone actually invest in your future. I handed out the packets. Full tuition covered, monthly stipends for living expenses, guaranteed apprenticeships at the family seafood business after graduation. The kind of opportunity Grandpa had dreamed of providing. Your grandparents built this business through hard graft. I told them, watching their faces light up as they read through the details. No shortcuts, no handouts they didn't earn. Just honest work and treating people with respect. One boy, barely 16, grinned so widely I thought his face might split. This means I can stay. Don't have to leave town to find work. Their hope was infectious. It reminded me of learning the business from Grandpa, those summer holidays spent on fishing boats and in warehouses, understanding that work had value and dignity. I'd stopped checking Mom's Instagram entirely. Last I'd heard from Brandon, who couldn't help himself from occasionally hate scrolling. Her last post had been another tearful rant about family betrayal. Zero engagement. Her comments section full of criticism rather than sympathy. I'd blocked her number months ago. The satisfaction of that single action still brought me joy. Dad's voicemails had stopped after the 20th one went unanswered. His demands for fair distribution of the 18 million pounds had shifted from angry to desperate to pathetic before finally, blessedly, ceasing entirely. Jeremy had tried texting from a new number last week. Coffee? Just a talk? I know I messed up. I blocked it without responding. Some bridges should stay burned. Some relationships aren't worth salvaging, no matter how many apologies are offered after the damage is done. The mediation agreement they'd signed was holding. Everything they'd stolen had been returned. The silverware now sat in the dining room cabinet where Grandma had kept it. The ledgers were back in the study. Even that bloody painting was rehung in the hallway. Physical contact was over, done. And honestly, I'd never felt lighter. Ryan rang with updates that ranged from mundane to absolutely magnificent in their schadenfreude. Your parents have violated protective orders again, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Lawyers try to hide their emotions, but Ryan had given up pretending he wasn't enjoying this. They contacted one of your store managers directly, tried to convince him you were running the business into the ground. The court had responded with increased fines. Dad's real estate empire would have been teetering anyway, collapsed completely under Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His credit score, once a source of insufferable pride at dinner parties, was now somewhere in the range of active fraud case. Portland's business community had blacklisted him entirely. No one would work with him. No one would return his calls. In a town as tight-knit as Portland, being on the wrong side of the Moreno name was essentially career suicide. He'd done it to himself, really, but it was still deeply satisfying to watch. Brandon stopped by after school, carrying fish and chips because he understood me on a spiritual level. Your mum's completely done as an influencer, he said, scrolling through his phone whilst methodically stealing my chips. Mum's follower count had cratered. The Portland Press Herald's expose about the funeral theft, backed by leaked details from the mediation, had destroyed what remained of her carefully crafted image. The civil defamation lawsuit Ryan had filed was still winding through the courts. Maine's laws on slander were strict, and Mum's lost brand deals and canceled sponsorships were just beginning. She'd built her entire identity on lies. And when the truth emerged, the whole edifice had collapsed. Poetic justice, really. Jeremy's startup had imploded spectacularly. His investors, already nervous about the family drama, had pulled their funding the moment elder abuse charges were mentioned as a possibility. Under Maine law, what my family had done, the manipulation during hospital visits, the theft, the exploitation of elderly relatives, qualified as elder abuse. Ryan had kept the option open. Criminal charges could still be filed. Probation at minimum. Possibly prison time. Jeremy's last message had read, I know I can't fix this. I know you won't forgive me. But I need you to know I'm sorry. I'd read it once. Felt nothing. Deleted it. Some apologies are too late. Some actions cross lines that can't be uncrossed, no matter how genuine the regret. The seafood business was flourishing under Anna's management. The employee ownership plan had transformed morale. People who'd worked for Grandpa for decades were finally sharing in the success they'd helped create. Victoria sent quarterly financial reports. The estate's investments were stable, growing steadily, performing better than anyone had projected. Grandpa's legacy wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. They'd be extraordinarily proud, Victoria had written in her last email, and I'd had to take a moment because that validation from someone who'd known them so well meant everything. One evening, Louise appeared with another box from the attic. Your grandparents marked this for Alexander. When things settle, he said, setting it on the study desk. Inside were Grandpa's journals from the 1960s. Handwritten entries about starting the business. The struggles. The small victories. Building something from nothing through sheer determination and treating people fairly. A sealed envelope sat on top, my name in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. Alexander, it read, choose who you call family by their actions, not their surnames. Real family lifts you up. Everyone else is just noise. Stand firm. You're stronger than you know. All our love, always. I sat there, holding that letter, and let myself feel the grief I'd been pushing down for months. Not just for losing them, but for never having the parents I deserved. For the family that could have been, but never was. At school the next day, a student lingered after class. Year 11 girl, bright, but anxious. My family expects me to pay them back, she said quietly. For everything. Raising me. Feeding me school supplies. They keep a running total. I pulled out a folder I'd assembled. Resources on financial abuse, information about healthy boundaries, contact details for support services. Things I'd needed at her age and hadn't had. You don't owe anyone for basic parental responsibilities. I told her firmly, that's what parents are supposed to do. Not hold it over you like debt. She left looking slightly less burdened, and I'd felt like maybe all this horror had served some purpose. 6 months post-mediation, the Portland Press-Herald published a full feature on the Moreno Foundation. Honoring legacy through community investment, the headline proclaimed. The article detailed the scholarships, the employee profit-sharing program, the business's community impact, and charitable initiatives. Not one word about family drama, theft, or court cases. Ryan had managed the press beautifully, keeping the dysfunction out of public record whilst letting the good work speak for itself. I walked the Harbor House grounds that evening, stopping at the memorial garden I planted. Native flowers Grandma had loved. A stone bench with a simple plaque, Crystal and Eric Moreno, built on love, sustained by integrity. That night, the team gathered for dinner. Ryan, Brandon, Anna, Victoria, Luis, Denise, the people who'd stood by me when they absolutely didn't have to. The dining room that had once hosted manipulation and lies now held genuine warmth. Laughter that wasn't performed. Friendship that was chosen. This was family. Real family. Built on loyalty, trust, and actually caring about each other's well-being. Mom, Dad, and Jeremy kept making attempts. New phone numbers. Anonymous email accounts. A letter from yet another solicitor suggesting reconciliation in the spirit of family harmony. I ignored every single one. My block list was epic. My spam filter was working overtime. And I'd made absolute peace with cutting them off completely. Their world had imploded under the weight of their own choices. Dad's business destroyed. Mom's influencer persona obliterated. Jeremy's startup bankrupt and his reputation in tatters. And from the wreckage of their greed, I'd built something meaningful. Something that would have made Grandpa and Grandma proud. The lesson had been brutal but clear. Family is earned, not owed. DNA doesn't automatically come with loyalty rights. Real family, the kind worth keeping, shows up, supports you, and treats you with basic human decency. Everything else? Just people who happen to share your genetic code and think that entitles them to whatever you have. It doesn't. I'd learned it the hard way, but I'd learned it thoroughly. Standing in the harbor house, looking out over the gray water with Grandpa's scarf still hanging on the coat rack and Grandma's note in my desk drawer, I finally felt something other than anger or grief or determination. I felt free. Free from their manipulation. Free from their demands. Free from the crushing weight of being related to people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. It had cost me a family I'd never really had anyway. But in return, I'd found people who actually cared. Built a legacy that honored the grandparents who believed in me. Created something that would help young people who needed the same chances I'd been given. That seemed like a fair trade. Better than fair, actually. Grandpa would have called it a bloody good deal. And honestly, for once, I absolutely agreed. The end. Alexander Moreno inherited 18 million pounds, lost a toxic family, gained real friends, and learned that the best revenge is building something beautiful from the ashes of other people's greed. The Moreno Foundation continues to provide scholarships to young people in the fishing and seafood industry. The business thrives under employee ownership. And Alexander still teaches year 6. Because some things are about more than money. His family, last seen posting increasingly desperate content, to dwindling follower counts. Karma remains undefeated.